Eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot feel.
What's up, everybody? This is Joyce Yossi Samuels, and you are tuning in to episode 88 of the It Will Come Show. And today we're going to be talking about the Bitcoin halving that just took place last night. Not too long ago, actually. It was about 6 to 7 hours. And what it means in layman's terms. So let's dive straight into it. All right, let me go into presentation mode. All right, excuse me with my croaky voice in the morning. So, of course, if you are tuning into the show for the first time, welcome. The show is sponsored by Faya at Faya Corp, and today we are looking at the 2020 Bitcoin halving and what it means. Now, because this is a pretty significant event, I thought I'd actually take you guys through a presentation style versus my sort of what I was doing before, which was just sharing links and talking about them. So let's go straight into it. Today I'm going to actually be talking about the 3 Bitcoins again, because if you are somebody new to Bitcoin, this might be useful for you to know and understand. Blockchain, what it is, very simplified. Block rewards, difficulty adjustments, the halving itself, miners versus transaction processors, price versus transaction volume, TX stands for transaction, and then an example of what all of this halving stuff means in the real world. So I'm going to be using healthcare as an example. So all of this, again, if you're new to this world, this may look like, gibberish to you. But the reason why I'm sharing it is because it will help explain what and why the Bitcoin halving matters. All right. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so if you tuned into my previous episodes, especially the one about the 3 Bitcoin archetypes and their associated communities, you might remember this slide. This is where I was talking about the fact that there are 3 Bitcoins actually out in the market at the moment. BTC, which is the one most people know and trade with or quote-unquote invest. BCH, which is Bitcoin Cash, that's the one on the left. And then BSV, which is the one on the right. Okay. So what I'm going to do to explain this, I'm going to be using a new analogy because it's a little bit more graphic, but it might help you make more sense of what's going on. So the way I sort of look at Bitcoin, right, and why people get confused or may not even know that there's 3 different versions. BTC, the way Bitcoin was created was in a way that if anything ever got changed or altered, it could split off or fork into a different form or different potential chain, right, or different name. And so this is kind of what happened to BTC, BCH, and BSV, right? So BTC was the first form. Changes were made. There were some, infighting, and then it shed its skin. BTC remained, and then became Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash had some promise and hope, but then similar things happened again. Human beings, they had some disagreements about the how, and they split again, or if we're using this example, shed its skin. And so right now, BSV, I would say, in my opinion, holds true to the sort of original essence of Bitcoin, because it actually is closest to the original blockchain as per version 0.1. And so what most people are investing in right now with BTC, and remember, this is my take and understanding based off of the last 7 years. So I first got exposed to Bitcoin in 2013, and so this is how I see it. Right. So BTC, everybody's still enamored by the shedded skin. Right. Under the hood, there's not much happening, innovation happening. Things are not being used. People are literally buying the skin and holding it and not doing anything with it. Whereas the actual essence of Bitcoin is actually being used and is moving in BSV right now, right? And so it's a bit of a graphic analogy, but I hope it makes sense. Now, I'm explaining a blockchain because this has to do with the halving event that took place last night. So remembering that this is going to be a very oversimplified explanation, at the top you can see there generally a blockchain is literally a chain of blocks. So you have these blocks, right, as you can see, and there's a chain that connects all of them, right? And essentially, these blocks keep connecting with one another, and they create essentially the longest chain. The longest chain being sort of what is truest. Underneath, I've put a picture of a plumbing system. The reason I put this is because this is probably the best way to see Bitcoin. You actually kind of need to see it as a boring plumbing system. And that's kind of how it was intended to be. You know, you might hear a lot of people talk about it being digital gold and digital silver, store of value, and all that stuff. It is a cash system, right? And if you think about a plumbing system, same sort of analogy, right? Bitcoin is the cash system, and then like a plumbing system, you can see here all the pipes. Think of them as blockchains, right? And maybe each individual pipe piece being a block connected together to form these long pipes, right? And then I'll come back into sort of like why the actual size of the pipes matter and how that actually ties in with Bitcoin and sort of the disputes around, you know, what is Bitcoin or not. Okay, so next up we got the block rewards. Block rewards is essentially how Bitcoin is minted or birthed into the world. So just like gold miners, in a way, you have these sort of mining companies, and down below you can see a picture of one of the mining factories, whereby you have all of these GPUs, computing systems, hardware, just crunching numbers to essentially mine 1 Bitcoin. Or 12.5 Bitcoin per block. And so what this means is that all these miners, as a reward for sort of calculating these mathematical problems in the background, they get some Bitcoin, all right, in return. And you're probably wondering, like, why do they need to do that? It's essentially to provide a way to show, for people to work for it, right? So that it's not just free money that's being printed, that people actually have to work towards getting these Bitcoin. It's part of the Bitcoin system. All right, so that's the block rewards, and I'm going to tie all this up in terms of the halving again. So stay with me. Next up, we've got difficulty adjustments. These are also known as DAAs, difficulty adjustment algorithm. That's what DAA stands for, and essentially the difficulty adjustments is what takes place every time there is a halving. So essentially, roughly every 4 years, roughly every 4 years, people will then experience the halving effect. All right. So what this means is, for every block mined, the amount of Bitcoin that a miner will get is halved. Right. So currently, it's at around, before it was around 12.5. It has now gone down to 6.25 Bitcoin per block that is mined by a miner. Okay, and this is something that a lot of people were not looking at least in the BTC camp, and how that it would impact sort of the way that miners stay profitable, right? So there's a movement that's taking place from focusing on just the miner reward side to transactions. So I'll get into that soon. So essentially, this difficulty adjustment and how, say, BTC and BCH made some sort of adjustments to those radically changes miner behavior and may radically change where miners decide to go. So the halving itself. Okay, so what is it? The Bitcoin halving is when it is an event where the reward for mining new blocks is halved, as mentioned, and meaning miners receive 50% fewer Bitcoins for verifying transactions. Right? So we were talking about these blocks. So all of these transactions, the reward for them, it gets halved. So Bitcoin halvings are scheduled to occur every 210,000 blocks. Roughly every 4 years, until the maximum supply of 21 million Bitcoins has been generated by the network. So, eventually, of course, you'll reach a point where all the Bitcoin is that exists is mined by the miners, right? And so once the miner's job is done, what do they have left to do? Well, this is why we come to the transaction side, which I'll talk about very shortly, and why miners who sort of start to position themselves for a transaction economy versus just mining blocks are going to be set up way better for a future Bitcoin world than those who are trying to just sit on their laurels and still get rewarded for doing little work. When is the next Bitcoin halving? So 18th May in the week. Yep. So 12th of May is when it took place. So this was just half a day ago now. And the reward fell from 12.5 Bitcoin to 6.25 Bitcoins now. All right. Now, I was talking about the miners versus transaction processors. And I do see some comments coming up, but I'm going to address them at the end of this. Miners versus transaction processors. So we've had these miners, right? And for the time being, well, since Bitcoin's been around, a lot of these companies have referred to themselves as miners. Some of the more innovative and forward-thinking miners and their associated companies have started to call themselves transaction processors, all right? And for good reason, because the focus now is not about, the reward that you get for mining Bitcoin. It needs to focus on the reward you get for processing transactions. And so transactions, and if we use sort of the plumbing system analogy, would be anything going through these pipes, right? So think of the water as cash, right? Those are transactions flowing through all of these pipes, right? And so you can imagine the size of the pipes will determine how much flow can take place. And so Tal will pioneer the transaction processing model that will replace mining as a halving forces everyone over to BSV, as its massive scaling enables transaction fees to replace the subsidy. All right. So Calvinaire, he owns Tal, which is a mining company. I believe Tal is based off of the volcano in the Philippines. And they've been positioning themselves in the background to become transaction processors versus miners. And a lot of money has been going into this. And this is literally from 4 hours ago, right? As we were talking about, as the Bitcoin halving occurs, essentially what happens is miners that have not prepared themselves end up going out of business. It becomes unprofitable to keep running. And so straight after the halving, this is what happens. Up to 30% of Bitcoin miners close shop as business turns unprofitable after halving, right? So they've been so focused on, making their money through just the mining aspect alone and not thinking ahead and planning ahead for why the transaction stuff is needed or required. And so, as you can see now, 30% of the miners close shop. I remember just seeing about 1 or 2 months ago in, I think it was Brazil or Argentina, a few Bitcoin miners there were already starting to close up shop because it was getting unprofitable there. And now, with the reward having even further, I think we're going to start seeing this more. And what this means is if there's not enough miners, right, able to keep things profitable on BTC, the miners will need to look to other versions of Bitcoin, right, the other chains, so this is BCH or BSV, to see which is most profitable, if they want to have a business at all, right? Because these miners are actually what help secure the network. So the miners do also need to be upping their game, keeping themselves, their hardware upgraded, and finding ways to stay profitable, because you get penalized otherwise. And I'll sort of translate this into the real world, like right now what's happening in the world is, essentially all businesses that have kind of gone bust as a result of the global pandemic. This is actually a way, a nature's way, if you want to call it that, of sort of weeding out, you can call it the weak, or you can call it those who were running unsustainable models to begin with, right? People who were propping themselves up with debts and more debts, right? Who weren't really running a business, or they weren't investing and keeping themselves afloat and innovating. They get penalized. Now, what's happening in the real world is we're printing money to just keep these guys afloat, right? Which doesn't actually allow them to learn anything. And so the same thing happens in the Bitcoin world. It's kind of embedded into the system that you get penalized if you don't keep moving, keep flowing, keep innovating, right? That's part of its game. And this is just a way so that if people try to game the system so much whereby they can expect to be rewarded for doing nothing, well, Bitcoin goes, I don't care, All right, so miners versus transaction processors. So, I think I had this. Oh, okay. So I kind of put this here. Okay, yeah. So I put this here, and I'm going to go back to this one here. Price versus transaction volume. So if you watched my episode from yesterday, you might have noticed that I spoke about the wealth dynamic square, right? I talked about the sort of 4 seasons. Up at the top, you got Earth. On the right, up on the top, you've got spring season. On the right, you've got summer. Down below, you have autumn, and then on the left, winter. And different sort of entrepreneurs and different businesses will gravitate to these different sides or areas, right? And so the language that these type of entrepreneurs or these type of businesses use gets displayed in a lot of companies in the Bitcoin world too. So what we're seeing now is that in the marketplace, I would say we have people looking at, on the right side, they've been very focused on sort of the block rewards. They've been looking at the price per customer, so the number of users who have bought and held Bitcoin, BTC. They've been focused so much on that. And Bitcoin was always built as sort of the left side, a transaction-based business model. So what that means is, over time, even though people were trying to pull it towards that right side that you see there, the market-based, right? So the dollars per customer, or dollars per hodlers, if you want to call it that, they've been so focused on the price, not realizing that under the hood, what they've invested in is, let me go back here, BTC, right? This skin, nothing under the hood anymore. So this is why you'll see in the BTC world, a lot of people buy in, price will go up, but nothing's actually happening underneath. And I'm talking about like on the chain of BTC. There's some stuff that's happening side chain wise, but I won't go into that too much. So what you need to look at is the languaging around transaction based. So dollar, or the value per transaction. And as we can see, right, we had the TAL guys talking about becoming transaction processing model, right, or transaction processors. And if you were paying attention to yesterday's episode, essentially the biggest, largest businesses in the world are actually these guys here on the left. They're the ones who actually create the systems for wealth generation, because they're systems oriented to begin with. They have a winter type of language, and they think in volume. All right. Whereas the guys on the right, who are market based, they're going to be looking at how they're going to have the store of value, the gold and silver narrative, because they're looking at making something small and making the price of that larger, right? So they're looking. They don't mind that if the transaction fee is like $5, right? Because it doesn't matter for people who are wealthy, right? If they're moving billions of dollars and the transaction fee for that is $5, that's nothing. But if you're actually looking to build a new type of system that's based on micropayments, right? So say, for example, you want to pay something that's a tenth of a cent, but it costs $5. Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? So the true innovation of Bitcoin is in the micropayments. And so in order for that type of ecosystem to come into existence, you need to have a transaction-based sort of business model and plumbing infrastructure. So I would say it's very important for you to watch this space, what's happening here. So yeah, got that there. Now I'm showing this, about to wrap up, but these are sort of just some thumbnails, snapshots from tweets, right? And I've showed this before in previous episodes, but after the halving, right, all of them have taken place now. You got BTC, BCH, and then BSV. If you were here with me, I'd ask you, okay, what do you see as the difference between all of these, right? You can see Bitcoin Cash. I don't know what they're doing anymore. They're just kind of dead there. But BTC and BSV are the ones who are sort of dominating in 50% areas, right? So BTC, 50% wise, they have the hash rate and network nodes. BSV have the transactions and the block sizes, all right? Now, this is literally the tension between what we were looking at here, market-based versus transaction-based, right? If you're tuning into yesterday's episode, I was talking about socialism versus capitalism. You are seeing those sort of ideologies playing out within Bitcoin, the Bitcoin world itself. So hash rate, network nodes, they're all about the people, right? So the people in this camp, they're all like, every single person at home should be able to afford their own Raspberry Pi, be able to have their own home nodes, right? To be able to ensure that it's fair for everybody, right? The hash rate. So this is like the equivalent of like the 99%, right? So for hash rate is measuring, okay, yep, we have all the sort of computing power, right? And that's where true power is, right? We are the 99%, we're for the common person. Whereas on the Bitcoin SV ecosystem side, for 3.7% of the same hash, they are able to produce 78.1% of the transactions. Now that's efficiency, right? So just imagine if BSV had the hash rate and the network nodes, how much more the transactions would be. So this is something that a lot of people on the BTC side are not looking at because they don't care, right? They think that the only thing that matters is the price in US dollars when the US dollar is falling anyways. Whereas BSV realized that in order to create true value, you have to have the volume of transactions, right? So if we're going back to the plumbing illustration we had before, that is literally how much can the pipes, right? And if you look at that as the block size, how many transactions can those pipes take? On BTC, they've limited it to 1 megabyte. So it's imagine just having like a small pipe like this, and you're trying to get all of the world's transactions through this small little pipe. What do you think is going to happen? And that's why they make it expensive. So instead of enlarging the pipes for everybody, they make it small and make the price to get through higher. So it slows down the network. That's why BTC, in my opinion, will never be able to reach its full potential because they've intentionally limited it from a technical standpoint. All right. So here on BSV, it's dominating on the transactions and the block sizes. And I would say to continue watching this because over time, this will play out in terms of producing true value. Now, in terms of a practical example of like why transaction volume matters. Okay, for a lot of the big players, right, and we're looking here again, right? The big players being like enterprises, corporations who serve millions of people, right? Healthcare being one of the big ones, right? There's a big issue in the healthcare industry around getting accurate records and being able to share or distribute that, properly between different institutions, companies, etc. And so healthcare is a great use case for blockchain/Bitcoin because if Bitcoin does manage to become one chain or the dominant blockchain, again, if you're new to this world, Bitcoin is a blockchain, then for healthcare especially, it can become a great source of truth, okay? But there's so much data already in the healthcare industry. And so in order to accommodate this, you cannot have small pipe sizes because that will just make things more inefficient for players in the healthcare industry, right? Big players have a lot of data to deal with, right? So if it costs them, if they have all this data and they have a lot of small transactions taking place, right? If it costs them $20 to send $5 worth of information, right? If we put a dollar value on information and data, then it is not going to become feasible for these type of big companies to actually leverage or utilize BTC. And so here, this took place, this event right here, EHR Data partners with Enchain to migrate healthcare data to Bitcoin SV. This occurred around February, all right, or at least it was announced. And here they're talking about sort of the opioid crisis and the importance of moving data in healthcare over to a reliable, scalable blockchain for the future, right? There are a lot of competing blockchains out in the market right now, but based on what I've shared with you, I believe that BSV is set up a lot better than many other folks in the ecosystem right now. But, it's one of those things where sometimes, even if technically you are the best, if people don't know about it, what happens? Okay? So this is just, again, a practical example of how Bitcoin could be used to address some real issues in an industry like healthcare. And then, finally, I'm just sharing a few other snapshots from the last, 6 hours. And on the left here, after the halving, this is what essentially the market looked like for the top 10 coins in the cryptocurrency world. Everything was down except for Bitcoin SV. And again, like what I just showed you, it is because companies in the BSV ecosystem have positioned themselves to be transaction processors and not just block reward miners. Okay, and so this was very encouraging, and this gives me more of a nod that BSV is set up well for the future. All right, and I still think we're going to see this play out over the next about 6 months. On the right here, you can see these were just news articles about Bitcoin miners closing shop. Right, 30%, 30%. Yeah, I think you're going to see more of this as people struggle to survive if they have not prepared. And then over in the lower right, you got Bitcoin SV mining profitability as a consequence of the Bitcoin halving. Bitcoin SV is actually now 59% more profitable to mine than BTC. And so let's see what the miners actually decide to do, whether they would rather just be stubborn and close shop or switch over to a more profitable chain. We shall see, because human beings aren't always rational, right? Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, of course, as always. But before that, let me just address some of the... All right, so let's see here. Let's go back. Let's decrease this. All right, there we go. Okay, Juan, we've got here... Bring that up again. Okay, Juan, is this a good moment for buying Bitcoin? Is this a good moment for buying Bitcoin? I do not give out financial advice. Again, what you decide to do is up to you. I look at Bitcoin more as a plumbing system, right? Again, so I'm not too concerned about the price of Bitcoin. I'm actually more concerned about companies that are building on top of Bitcoin. So yeah, unfortunately, my answer to that is it's up to you. If usually for investing, always say don't buy more than you can afford. So don't put in yeah. Essentially, financial advice, not my realm. So next one up. Okay, Juan, thank you very much. And yeah, I hope things are going well in Argentina. Chief Naples, a tool. Yep, don't know what you're talking about, Chief Naples, but feel free to explain and then I can address it. But again, essentially, I hope you found today's episode, let's move back here, useful, educational. Again, if you have any further questions, just feel free to reply in the comments. This is live streaming to Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube, so you can find this episode across all three. The main thing is with the halving, pay attention to what happened to the mining companies, not just the price, because the price aspect will be impacted later. But look at what happened to the mining companies. That's probably my only suggestion. And for Juan, around the investment side, just it's a very interesting time period. I don't want to be responsible for you losing money or gaining money. And I can see from Juan, we're about to going on default in Argentina. Not really good. Yeah, man. I know things all over the world right now, right? I think, to be honest, we'll see the true economic impact start in around September. As a result of everything that's taken place with the pandemic, right, and a whole bunch of businesses having stopped, I think, yeah, we'll really start to feel it more September, October time. So now is really a good time to just prepare. And, I'm doing my bit to do that. Well, I've kind of been doing that for a couple of years now. We had an event in 2019 at the beginning called The Great Reset. Just feel free to look up The Great Reset event, FAIA, F-A-I-A, on YouTube, and you'll see that launch event that we had. But, with that, guys, again, hope you learned something. As always, remember, through patience and persistence, it will come.
The eyes may be able to see, but without a heart, you cannot.